Please don't forget the money, man.
All my blessings, 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 all my blessings.
What a week for college football. As we knew, upsets were on the horizon with so many ranked teams on the road, but did we anticipate number one Alabama going down at Vanderbilt 40-35, losing the entire game, trailing 13-7 at the end of the first quarter and just getting ravaged the entire game? No, didn't really count on that one. How about number 4 Tennessee on the road, 19-14, falling to Arkansas? The goalposts heading a couple miles down the street in Nashville and being tossed in the river. Actually, I apologize. That was Vanderbilt. I'm getting my upsets confused. Arkansas also lost the field goals as well, though. How about number 9, Missouri? Possibly a flawed team, not worthy of their ranking, falling 41-10 to Texas A&M that seems to have found some footing. Number 10, Michigan, losing 27-17, flying across the country to play at Washington on the water. Number 11, USC, falling 24-17 in Minnesota. And their number of other close games as well. Number 22, Louisville fell 34-27 to SMU, further down the ranks. Of course, that didn't even register with some of the other big games. Number 25, UNLV, falling 44-41 to Syracuse, although they really got chipped out of the end of that game. We nearly had Miami fall after midnight on the East Coast. 20-point rally at the end of the fourth quarter in that game to win 39-38 over Cal. Just a crazy slate. I have updated my rankings. As we know, when everyone loses, no one gets bumped down that far, right? Number 1, Texas, they were on bye. They look like a really good team. That goes without saying. They somehow have 2 really good quarterbacks, even with Murphy leaving and transferring to become the starting quarterback at Duke. They have a top 5 passing defense now, one of the top defenses in the country overall. They haven't really been challenged, but you have to remember they were 122nd, I believe, last season in passing defense. They'll face some quarterbacks, of course, coming up that will challenge them. Georgia, maybe Texas A&M, but they'll also face some teams that won't be able to. I have Ohio State number 2. That's fairly obvious at this point, I believe. They did win as well over Iowa, 35-7. Their first decent win of the season, you have to say. Will Howard was 21 for 25, 209 yards, 4 touchdowns, did have a turnover. They were able to run effectively. Jeremiah Smith, 4 grabs for 89 yards and a touchdown. And Ibuka, 3 touchdowns as well for him. And they got several sacks in there as well. Iowa just couldn't move the ball. Certainly understandable there. I have Georgia in the number 3 spot. Yes, they lost to Alabama. They lost on the road. They had big problems in the first half. They turned around in the second half, nearly won the game. Were driving for a tying touchdown to put it in the overtime, and it was a good play by a defensive back that had them coming up short. So I still have Georgia, although they have problems offensively, just don't have really big playmakers, which has been a problem for a couple years that they've skated by really. And they could have lost at Kentucky, but for right now, I'm pushing them way up there to the 3 spot. It's continuity. It's a quarterback that you know has a high level, and there's been sluggishness across the board. Oregon, Penn State against Bowling Green, Miami the past couple games. That's great. Those 3 are undefeated, but Georgia playing a big game against Alabama and just losing that by the skin of their teeth. Come on. I'm putting that team above Oregon, Penn State, Miami. I juggled between Oregon and Penn State in the 4-5. I went Oregon 4, Penn State 5. Oregon, as we know, struggled at the beginning of the year. Struggled against Idaho. That was not a great look for them. And they've looked better the past few weeks. Michigan State 31-10 was the last victim. They beat UCLA a couple weeks ago as well. And they've beaten Oregon State solidly. They did have to drive to beat Boise State in week 2, but that looks like a pretty good Boise State team. Problems on the defensive end, but that goes down. It's probably their best win so far. Oregon Ducks looking a lot better here. Dillon Gabriel's just not quite a superstar. Now the box stats say completing almost 78% of his passes, 11 touchdowns, 3 picks, almost 1,500 yards. But he's just not an uber star. 16 sacks for the team on the season. Just a really good all-around squad. But again, they weren't healthy to start the season, and they're starting to look really good at this particular point. Almost 50% conversion rate on third down, 35 points per game, which again is up from the 24 they scored against Idaho, which should have been the cakewalk to start off the season. So they're starting to look better. Number 5, I put Penn State. Penn State's status really hasn't changed that much in the past 5 years, except now they seem to have 2 really good running backs. Singleton was a scratch last week. Not quite sure. Yeah, I should say a couple days ago. Not quite sure why. He should be back. As a surprise to the staff as well. In the 27-11 over UCLA. Still looking good for Drew Aller, but not a lot is expected of him. 17 for 24, 237 and a touchdown in this ball game. But they'll be effective regardless. The defense looks good too. UCLA, not a match for them, of course. Illinois, they won 21-7 with a late touchdown in that one. Kent State, Bowling Green, West Virginia, not a match for this squad at all. They don't have Michigan at all on the schedule, so it will come down to a home game with Ohio State. They play USC on the road this week. They do have Wisconsin on the road as well. They get Washington at home, so they don't have to fly across the country for that one at least. Maybe Minnesota at home. Schedule's setting up pretty nice for Penn State here. I put Miami in the 6th spot. They do have wins over Virginia Tech, at Cal, at Florida, at SF. You can say what you want about those wins, how those teams are going to straighten out. But yeah, it's been tough the past couple weeks. 4-point win over Virginia Tech, 1-point win over Cal. And they look so good in the Florida A&M, and Ball State wins. They still have a bye week coming up. They play at Louisville, home against Florida State, home against Duke, at Georgia Tech, home against Wake, at Syracuse. Could they slip up? Yes. Could they slip up twice? Absolutely. But are they also capable of just the most amazing things offensively? Yeah. Yes, they certainly are. 278-26 was the yardage difference in that fourth quarter against Cal in that comeback. Just crazy. And the overall Cal was 2 for 10 on third down, 2.9 yards a carry. They had 100 plus fewer yards. Box score clearly said Miami won the game. It was the box, the scoreboard that didn't. And they were able to get it done in the end. It just says skin of your teeth. Again, skin of your teeth win. So they're playing it too close, but this is still a good football team. They just need to stay awake here. So I dropped Alabama down to the 7 hole. And they certainly seem vulnerable against Vanderbilt. I think Jane Milroe is still limited at times in what he can do. This team was still very effective in this specific game on third down. He still had 310 yards passing, 18 for 24, touchdown and a pick. But he was kept in his little pocket. Only 10 yards on the ground and a touchdown. Third down, they were still 3 for 6, 1 for 1 on fourth down. Vanderbilt doubled up in time. 42 minutes to almost 18. They were 12 for 18, converting on third down. They had more yards than Alabama. They didn't have any turnovers. They forced a couple from the Tide. They had more first downs. They just did a really good job and just flat out beat them. Arguably 6 straight quarters of poor football by Alabama at this point, going back to the Georgia game. Certainly replicable damage to restricting Alabama's offense. They couldn't run the ball, and exploiting the defense and the secondary especially. Diago Pavia, 16 for 20 passing, 252, 2 touchdowns. He got it going on the ground a little bit. Just enough to be effective as well to do damage to Alabama. Now, Vandy's not nothing. It wasn't too long ago they beat Kentucky, Florida. This is a good staff they've got there. They nearly beat Virginia Tech earlier this season. They did beat Virginia Tech, I apologize. They nearly beat Missouri in overtime earlier as well. They could have a real resume built for themselves. Just come up short there against Mizzou. This is a good football team, but Alabama's schedule, of course, is going to continue to get more difficult. At Tennessee, home against Missouri, at LSU, at Oklahoma, Iron Bowl still. Tough games on the slate for Alabama, and you just cannot lose to Vanderbilt, which is 0-4-60 all-time against top 5 teams. It's just outrageous. I did put 7, 8, 9, 10 down as Tennessee, Clemson, Iowa State. Nico did have some real problems against Arkansas. He was not very effective. The game ended appropriately when they had a shot to score a touchdown late. They were in the red zone, and they had a couple shots. 4th down, last play of the game, whatever. Time was running out as it was. He even throw the ball. He was scrambling, then he got past the line of scrimmage. You're like, oh, now he can't throw the ball. Now he's got to run. Now he's out of bounds, and the game's over. Didn't even get a pass off. Just horrible job. Even for a freshman, throw the damn ball. Didn't give himself a chance. 158 yards passing. Was not very effective moving at any point in this ball game. Arkansas controlled the line of scrimmage, and the defense played pretty good for Tennessee. They didn't allow Arkansas to score very well in the red zone at all. They doubled up in time of possession for a good chunk of this game. I think the entire first half. They ended up 11 minutes ahead. Arkansas had 100 yards more offense. It was a clean game, no turnovers, 10 penalties on the road for Tennessee, 4.8 yards per carry, but couldn't get anything going through the air. 0 for 2 on 4th down, 7 for 16 on 3rd. Arkansas was only 6 for 16 and 1 for 3 on 4th down, but they kept the ball rolling when they were able to convert. Took some clock, completed some passes. Taylor Green did get banged up in this one. Matichai, Singleton came in, but they still were able to win the ball game here. Nico can obviously play a lot better, and that's certainly on track to develop still as we continue this season. And the lines of scrimmage still have their moments. Again, got the ground game going. Restricted what Arkansas was really able to do, but you have to be able to take the ball away. I have Clemson in the 9 spot, who whooped up on Florida State 29-13 on the road this past weekend. Now, they scored most of their points in the first half. They were up 17-0. They were up 23-7 at the half. And then they kind of chilled. They didn't have to do a lot. 500 yards to 250, a straight double up across the board against Florida State. Played a pretty clean game. Klubnik, 19 for 33, 235, and 2 touchdowns. Fifta had a good game as well with 154 yards on the ground. This team can still do more damage, I think. I mean, they've rolled over Stanford, NC State, Appalachian State the past 3 weeks ever since the Georgia final of 34-3 that was pretty dominating in the opener. I think they have more levels they can still hit, but the point is they've taken the loss after Georgia pretty seriously, and I think this is actually a pretty good football team, even if Cade Klubnik is not actually a really good football player, which has been pretty obvious since the day he stepped up to the plate there. Number 10, I put Iowa State. Not quite sure what to make of them, quite frankly. They beat Baylor 43-21 after it was sluggish to start in that ball game. They're 5-0 now. Wins over Iowa and Baylor is the big ones. At Houston, Arkansas State, and North Dakota don't count for anything. Rico Becht is back there at quarterback. 66% completion percentage, 9-3 touchdown interception, keeping him pretty clean back there. They have several guys that can run the ball. Jalen Jackson, Obi Sama, the third. It seems like a good football team on both sides of the football. Just waiting for the schedule to bring a more interesting opponent, quite frankly. West Virginia next, then Central Florida, Texas Tech maybe, at Kansas, Cincinnati, at Utah, Kansas State. Other than Idaho, I'm not sure that any of these teams are going to bowl games. And even Idaho's one-sided. 20-19 was the final in that one. Beck had 272 yards passing in that ball game. But that is my top 10 at the moment. I penciled out a top 25 as well. I had A&M at 11. I still think it's a good football team. I had them in the playoffs at the beginning of the season. Lots of teams have dysfunction, but A&M just seems to have a lot of problems. Wingman was surprisingly back in for this one. He was questionable. Back under center. Had a great football game in their matchup in smashing Missouri, absolutely smashing them. Missouri's defense had played good, only giving up 3 big plays through the first 4 games, and they gave up 7 to Texas A&M. And the Aggies' defense constantly had Cook under pressure there from Missouri, and just slap that offensive line, slap that whole group around there. I think this team could still compete, especially after what we saw this past weekend with some of the top teams in the SEC. I still really like Texas A&M. If they can keep someone under center reasonably healthy, keep the offensive line intact there, get some pressure with the defense, the pieces are still there. Just get the damn group together. That 21-13 loss to Notre Dame looks a ways. That was pretty sound in week 1, but that was quite a ways away now. Of course, McNeese State they beat, Florida, Bowling Green close, Arkansas close, but this was a big comeback for Wingman. Missouri State's up next before they get LSU the next test. After that, at South Carolina is always tough. New Mexico at Auburn. They end the season home against Texas. So we have a long ways to go. They have a lot of not so great stats. They're in the hundreds as far as passing offense, but top 10 in rushing offense. Top 20 defense overall. But again, this team just cannot stay healthy. And a lot of squads have that issue. But for the love of God, this squad, no one quite has the potential that this group does. That isn't being fully realized in my thought process. After A&M, I do have that Notre Dame team at 11. Again, they have a problem passing the football with Lincoln Riley. They were off this week, I believe. They were off. I had to double check. A lot of games, of course. LSU, I have in a 13 spot. I still don't have a lot of belief in LSU. I would love to. I'd love to. The offense still does a lot of damage, but they, on the flip side, have defensive issues. How about Ole Miss? They seem to have just quality issues. They can put up points to a certain level of opponent, and they can play pretty good defense to a certain level. I'm still waiting for the big surprise upset. Will they beat Alabama? Will they beat even an LSU? It's on the docket. Still waiting for that big surprise. But they can't keep going on just picking off the weak. They beat South Carolina 27-3. Offense wasn't super spectacular, but we know South Carolina's defensive line's pretty good there. And they absolutely wrecked the offense for the Gamecocks there. Pressures, sacks, you name it, they did it. Looked effective on that side of the football. Again, still time to grow into both sides of the football to see where the weaknesses are. I'd love to see the Rebels up and going and have a shot at the SEC. In the 15th spot, I have Utah. Again, where's Cam Rising? He clearly makes a big difference there. Can't lose to Arizona at home one weekend and then turn around and watch Arizona take a crap the next weekend and drop its ball game at home to Texas Tech. That's just not a good look. A Texas Tech team that was giving up points to everyone and their mother, and all of a sudden Arizona loses 28-22. Bad. Very bad. I have Kansas State hanging out down there, 16th spot. I think it's still a pretty good football team. Obviously, passing, not a super strength right now. 17, Indiana needs to play a really good football team, but looks like a good football team. 18's Boise State. I like the offense. I wish they'd kept Genty in to run the second half of that game. They pulled him, 3 touchdowns, almost 200 yards of offense. It'd be nice to see him win the Heisman. Can't pull him in the second half of the game against Utah State while you're running it up. Defense seems to be a little bit of a problem. 19 BYU, still undefeated. Can hit big plays. Still not sure how good a quality they are. 19, I have Oklahoma. Offensive issues, quarterback issues. Really good defense. Maybe should be ranked higher. And then, 21 Illinois, 22 SMU, 23 undefeated Army, 24 undefeated Navy, 25 Nebraska, with wins over Colorado and Rutgers, who are probably top 40 teams, and a close loss in overtime to that Illinois squad that is really good defensively and seems to have a pretty good quarterback in Luke Altmaier in his second year there. Pretty good relative, but, not bad there for the Fighting Illini. SMU seems to be probably a team that will finish in the top 5 of the ACC, right? Big win over Louisville. And Army-Navy, keep chugging along there. That would be my top 25 at this moment, coming off those big games. Texas, Ohio State, Georgia, Oregon, Penn State, Miami, Alabama, Tennessee, Clemson, Ohio State. That's my top 10. Texas A&M, Notre Dame, LSU, Ole Miss, Utah, Kansas State, Indiana, Boise State, BYU, Oklahoma, Illinois, SMU, Army, Navy, Nebraska. I think teams with the best chance to really rise in the next few weeks, Texas A&M, probably Notre Dame. Utah's got to get Cam Rising back, and we just don't know about that. Can't put them on the map yet. Boise State and Army-Navy, they keep rolling through the American Conference there. Teams that can slide, obviously. Still Miami. Still a Tennessee. Still a LSU. Ole Miss. And Oklahoma, especially with Texas coming up next year on deck. Week 7, the slate has soured just a little bit for us. We do have games every day of the week. We're in the midst of about a 2-month stretch here. We have football games every day between the NFL and college. So at this point, Tuesday has already wrapped up. Liberty has survived Florida International 31-24 in overtime. Not a super great showing for Liberty, but they managed to stay undefeated. Salter has 125 yards passing, 60 yards on the ground and a couple of touchdowns, and the Flames managed to pull it out against the Fighting Pitbulls of Florida International there in a tough one, I guess you could say. And a game that no one really watched. Wednesday, Jacksonville State 54-13 over New Mexico State. And Thursday, the favorites all won their games. Western Kentucky pummeled a winless UTEP 44-17. James Madison 39-7 over Coastal Carolina. What would have been a pretty good football game, but James Madison just ran away with that one. And Louisiana Tech 48-21 over Middle Tennessee in Conference USA battle there. Friday night here, we have a few games on the slate. Maryland at 3-2 will be hosting Northwestern at 2-3 at 8 o'clock on FS1. Maryland favored by double digits in that one as I try to get on the board in Big Ten play. UNLV at 4-1 will be heading on the road to play Utah State at 1-4 at 9 o'clock on the CBS Sports Network. The Rebels heavy favorites there. They seem to have found something, even though a couple guys there, of course, transferring out. Utah State, just not a very good football team by any stretch. Of course, got demoralized by Boise State this past week. Running Rebels faced their first loss of the season in a close one against Syracuse, 44-41, but they're still on track to do some damage in the Mountain West Conference. 10:30, we have what's going to be an interesting game. ESPN's going to have 4-1 Arizona State hosting a 4-1 Utah team, currently ranked 16th in the polls. But again, Cam Rising a question mark. They're 5.5-point favorites on the road. And again, Arizona State not looking like too bad of a football team. Decent wins over Kansas and Texas State, Mississippi State, and Wyoming haven't looked too good, but they got wins there as well. They do have the loss to what's looking like a good Texas Tech team on the road there, 31-28. Now, not a lot was expected from the Sun Devils at all this particular year. Sam Levitt transferred over from Michigan State. He's completing less than 60% of his passes. He's able to get it going on the ground a little bit. He's the second leading rusher on the team behind Cam Skidabo, who's got 6 touchdowns and 600 yards, averaging 5.5 per tote. And it's a pretty decent football team. Quite frankly, nothing particularly special. They're putting up over 30 points per game. They're not converting, picking up first downs, converting third downs at a particularly high rate, or doing anything particularly special. But Utah, with no Cam Rising, has just not looked like a good team. Again, they put up 10 points at home against an Arizona team, which is certainly a flawed roster. They struggled in a win against Oklahoma State, which is not looking very good. That same Utah State team that hasn't been looking very good was a 38-21 game, and Cam was in that one. So this could be just another interesting game where Utah is not necessarily going to pick up a win here. So that's late night on Friday. Saturday, the noon slate is sparse. We only have 9 games on the books. I have the top watch for myself tagged as Wisconsin at Rutgers, the Scarlet Knights on the Big Ten Network there, in a battle of the Big Reds. Not quite field goal favorites here in a low-scoring game. They've come back down to earth a little bit, especially since losing in the game against Nebraska on the road last week. Now, they beat Washington, who I think is pretty good. Pretty good as in their win 7, maybe 8 games. Same with Virginia Tech. That's kind of the level we're at here. I think they're a cut above that. And they certainly had a shot against Nebraska last week as well, a game that they fell 14-7. They're 2 for 14 on third down, which was tough. These two teams combined for just over 500 yards of total offense. Nebraska was 7 for 19 on third down and 3 for 3 on fourth down. So the defense was just not able to keep things going there for Rutgers, and just a razor thin game there. But Wisconsin, which has had their problems, and I personally have not watched a whole lot of this year, wins over West Michigan, South Dakota, and last week against Purdue have not been impressive. They've gotten slapped around by Alabama and USC, who've had their own problems in these ball games. So this would be really one of the only middling teams that Wisconsin has had to play. So this would kind of give them a real barometer on where they sit. They nearly tripled up on yardage against Purdue last week, but that's not saying a whole lot. The offense executed pretty well, 18 for 14 on third down. They still had a couple of turnovers. Braden Locke was in there at quarterback, 359 yards, 3 touchdowns, 11.6 yards passing down the field. He's been a sophomore there who's stepped into a pretty good position for the Wisconsin Badgers there. And the defense is all right. So hopefully they're coming around here. And they've taken care of the 3 weaker teams on the schedule, lost pretty big to the 2 much better teams. And they'll have a chance here for a big win over kind of middling squad. While Rutgers hopes to move to 5-1 overall and 2-1 in the Big Ten Conference. So just an interesting little nooner sitting there in the, the middle to upper level class of the Big Ten, you could say. Now, some of the channel flipper games might be more interesting. Iowa hosting Washington on Fox. I like Washington. I like what the defense is doing. I liked what they did in the win against Michigan. I still like that Will Rogers is guiding that offense. It's too bad that they already have 2 losses on the schedule, and they're basically going to be out of any kind of playoff conversation or any kind of big bull conversation unless they manage to win out from here on the rest of the season, with losses to Washington State and Rutgers already on the books. And games against Iowa, Indiana, USC, Penn State, and Oregon still upcoming. A third loss would really put a death nail in any big headliner type of postseason play. But I really like what this team's doing. I think that the offense can be dangerous, and I think the defense is kind of coming around, holding teams to less than 14 points per game. Of course, you can say that's probably the offenses they're playing, which is fair. We do see some of these less potent Big Ten offenses sometimes correlate with really good defenses, and also it's just by chance as well. We do have really good defensive play in the Big Ten. As a matter of fact, as far as yards per game allowed, Ohio State is number 1. Penn State is number 4. Number 6 is Minnesota. 7 is Indiana. And 8 is Washington as far as yardage allowed, fewest yards allowed per game. I just think Washington could be sneaky good. And it's going to be a low-scoring game, but they're playing a tough road game here against Iowa, who's favored by field goal with a 42.5-point over-under in this particular ball game. By the way, I mentioned last week, of course, Caleb Johnson, who's starting to get a little bit more national attention, I think, is the second leading running player, I guess I should say, running back in the country, playing for the Hawkeyes there with 771 yards and 10 touchdowns behind only Jinte, of course, the stud from Boise State. So don't lose track of that. The other channel flippers here I have are North Carolina at 3-3, hosting 4-2 Georgia Tech. Popping over there on the CW network. Could see some points in this one. 59.5-point over-under actually seems a little low to me. But Georgia Tech, one of the fun teams to watch. North Carolina, of course, continues to struggle on the defensive end of things. This is actually going to be the 5th ACC game for Georgia Tech on the season and the 3rd for North Carolina as we see some of those buys starting to impact things. North Carolina's lost 3 in a row now. James Madison, Duke, and Pittsburgh as well. So it's not exactly the most fun team to be watching right now. They don't have a whole lot of great prospects over there. It seems inevitable that we're going to see a coaching change sooner rather than later there, and see some real shakeup there. And of course, that means transfer portal and guys moving in and out. So I'm not sure we have a whole lot there to build on for the future, especially in this new transfer portal era. Georgia Tech is 2-2 in their last 4 now. Losses at Louisville and Syracuse, wins over VMI, and they did beat Duke last week, so don't sleep on that. Still a feisty team, but I do still have this in the channel flipper due to just the huge variability in how North Carolina can play and how feisty I think Georgia Tech is. Also, Wake Forest will be hosting Clemson. Now, Clemson might just beat face on Wake Forest. This game's going to be on ESPN. They got stuck with this one, but as we know, it can be dangerous for ranked teams, particularly in the top 10 on the road. But Clemson favored by nearly 3 touchdowns in this game with a 61.5-point over-under. The Demon Deacons managed to pull a win down over NC State, 34-30 last week. Even in their losses, they've been putting up some points. On the season, they've got 45-30, 6 against Ole Miss, 38 and 34. But this hasn't been the most, potent, most exciting, well-rounded Demon Deacons team. So it's possible that Clemson just goes in and beats face. And then finally, Alabama, which clearly is having defensive problems, will be hosting South Carolina. Now, this Gamecocks team, the Gamecocks program as a whole is different on the road, but we'll see if they can cause any disruption for Alabama here. We'll seemingly want to have a big bounce-back game after their loss to Vanderbilt. But this is on the radar as well, and this game will be easily accessible on ABC. Other notables, UMass hosting Missouri, currently ranked 21st on ESPN2. Buffalo will be hosting Toledo. Not that MACtion is a priority with a lot of other options on, but these two teams, along with several others, could be fighting for the top of the MAC conference. Toledo favored by nearly double digits on the road on ESPNU. They have wins over Mississippi State, don't forget, and Miami of Ohio last week. Although a lot of these teams are kind of right in the same ballparks. You may have team that's 2 or 3 wins on the record better than another, and we may not even have a double-digit spread on that. Of course, that can be due to the inequality of the non-conference schedule, and some of them playing some really good power teams. But Tucker Gleason is the quarterback for the Rockets. Seems to be pretty efficient at what he does. Defensively, I assume they'll have another pretty good group here, at least for MAC conference play. And Buffalo did beat NIU as a ranked squad. They lost to Connecticut horribly last week. They lost to Missouri 38-0. Probably lose at home, quite frankly. But the spread isn't that high. So upset? Not entirely out of the question. Army trying to stay undefeated, hosting UAB, who's just sliding. 1-4 now. They're on the CBS Sports Network. Army favored by 25, 26 plus points. How often do you see that? Absolutely outrageous, but they could quietly move to 26-0. Our afternoon window has 17 games. Of course, at 3:30, ABC will have the Red River rivalry in Dallas between currently number 1 Texas and number 18 Oklahoma. The Sooners are sitting at 4-1, looking good defensively, but Texas is coming off a bye. Quentin Ewer should be coming back after taking some time himself to heal his core injury, I believe it was. Manning is still in the wings. And this Texas team has just been mowing people down. One of the few teams that really hasn't struggled much this season, other than maybe a little bit of a slow start in a couple games, like Mississippi State last week, which again, different quarterback. You can argue, I guess you could argue Michigan, but they really haven't had any problems, and they've mowed down a number of teams. Now, Oklahoma, you can argue, Oklahoma's offense, if they had any kind of offense at all, throwing the ball, effective quarterback play, if they can get the ball running, it'd be the best that Texas has played. Because quite frankly, when they get Georgia on the 19th, that's going to be a completely different type of offense for Texas. But Oklahoma just doesn't seem like they're going to be doing a whole lot to what Texas has got so far. It's seen offensively, and I just don't think Oklahoma has a whole lot of shot in this game. Defensively, they might be able to cause some problems for Texas, but I just don't think this is going to be a game for too long, quite frankly. Penn State traveling across the country to USC on CBS will be the other big game. The Nittany Lions currently ranked 4th, but we know Big Ten teams so far this season that are traveling 2 time zones are 1 and I think 9 at this point, something close to that. Now you can talk about factors that go into that, quality of teams, that kind of thing, start times. But at this particular point, Penn State is better than USC, 5-0, 3-2. USC seems to have some offensive line problems. Of course, they still have some defensive problems, and this team could take a real slide. Penn State's still favored on the road by 3.5. Losses to Minnesota and Michigan on the road for USC, so they account for 2 of those losses by themselves. The Penn State, I think, can really do some damage running the football down USC's throat. And I think that's something that could possibly carry, as well as the defense. Penn State could be a team that changes one of those numbers or puts another win in the column for a team traveling 2 time zones. But this is one that could be on upset watch. I mean, Penn State, the close game to Bowling Green was obviously a strange one. They beat Kent State, which means nothing. A nice win at West Virginia, win at UCLA, and the survival. I mean, the solid pull away against Illinois. None of it's particularly impressive. I would say they're better than last season at the very least. Capable. Drew Aller still completing almost 71% of his passes for over 10 yards per completion. He's got 1 pick on the season. They haven't really ran the tires off of Nicholas Singleton. Katron Allen's been in the mix. Singleton still looks like the much better running back. And the defense has looked pretty good too, as you would expect, at all three levels. So we'll see what they can do flying across the country there. I kind of think Penn State could come away a couple scores in that one, personally. But intriguing to see. The Channel Flippers, how about undefeated Pitt, ranked 22nd, will be hosting Cal in that same time slot, 3:30 on ESPN. Pitt, not a team that I've had eyes on a whole lot so far this season. 5-0. Cal, of course, 3-2, but 0-2 in ACC play. And Pitt only favored by a field goal in this one with a 58.5 point over-under. Now, Cal's lost 2 in a row now. Of course, that weird one to Florida State. And then the come from behind by Miami to pull that one off from under the rug. And Cal, of course, traveling more than any other team this season. Already played games against Auburn, San Diego State, Florida State, Miami. Now we know all those teams are of mixed talent this season, but certainly capable programs. And teams that are a lot more difficult in their entirety than a lot of other teams have played so far at this point in the season. So it's a weary, tired team. And Pitt has a real opportunity to move to 6-0, but they have to buckle up and win here. So far, their wins have been over North Carolina, Youngstown State, West Virginia, a decent Cincinnati team, and Kent State. They have a really good quarterback there. Eli Holston continues to roll forward, 15 touchdowns, 3 picks, 65% completion percentage, almost 1,600 yards. His offensive line needs to do a little bit better protecting him, it seems like. This is two programs that really seem kind of middling. And we'll see what they can produce here. It kind of seems like they've overachieved so far this season. Cal sitting at 3-2. And Pittsburgh so far undefeated. I also have Virginia hosting Louisville, same slot, 3:30 ACC. Virginia is 4-1. Louisville sitting at 3-2, fell out of the rankings, of course. Still more than a touchdown favorite here on the road. Tough loss to SMU last week, and of course the loss to Notre Dame. That Georgia Tech, maybe even Jacksonville State, best wins right now for Louisville. It still looks like a good football team, but same as last year, doesn't quite seem to have just the high-powered talent. Now, Virginia is by no means a team that's a step above that. They have wins over Boston College and Coastal Carolina, lost to Maryland. I don't think that they should be that heavy underdogs. They might have some problems in the trenches, but we'll see if the Cavaliers can pull an upset and move to 5-1. And finally, how about undefeated 14th ranked BYU, the Cougars, hosting Arizona on Fox at 4 o'clock. Thank God the Pac-12 network is gone, and that's going to be accessible for everyone to see. BYU just continuing to kind of power around here, 2-0 in the conference, favored by a field goal. Playing a little defense, wins over Kansas State now by a large margin. SMU, which is being sneaky on the road, and Baylor on the road. Not too bad. Of course, no title contenders in there, but, it doesn't always happen. And the rest of the way, Arizona at home, Oklahoma State at home, at UCF, at Utah, home against Kansas, at Arizona State, home against Houston. All winnable games if you're a really high-quality program. That offense is still clicking. They're holding opponents to less than 200 passing yards, well under 200 passing yards per game. They can still be a very potent team on both sides of the football. Other notables, Eastern Michigan hosting Miami of Ohio at 2 o'clock on ESPNU. Eastern Michigan will probably start to catch some losses here, again, in MAC conference play. But as of right now, it's only one-loss team, 4-1 team here, but favored by less. Actually, they're underdogs. Underdogs at home against Miami of Ohio. Notre Dame will be hosting Stanford at 3:30 on NBC. Heavy favorites in that one. Illinois will be hosting this awful Purdue team at 3:30. Heavy favorites there. UCF will be hosting Cincinnati at 3:30 on ESPN2. A couple of 3-2 teams that have taken their lumps. Central Florida field goal favorite In this one, the Bearcats lost in a shootout to Texas Tech. Last week, again, not the best wins on the resume. Townsend, Miami of Ohio, Houston. Losses to Pitt and Texas Tech. Just not the best resume there. Brendan Sorsby is a pretty good quarterback, been pretty efficient for them. All things considered, not expected to be any kind of team to compete by the Big 12, and not saying that they will, but certainly a team that's of intrigue. San Jose State is still in decent standing. They're playing at Colorado State on True TV at 3:30. Northern Illinois will be playing at Bowling Green, to the Darlings, pulling some upsets in Northern Illinois, and Bowling Green coming close in the non-conference schedule. They're on ESPN+. ESPN will be playing South Florida hosting Memphis at 3:30, two of the more fun teams in the country. Memphis able to throw that ball around and get some points on the board. Florida State and Byron Brown able to do some things as well. And finally, 4:15 will have number 5 Georgia hosting Mississippi State, as they're probably going to walk through that one. Mississippi State, along with Purdue, one of the worst teams in the Power 4. Now, our evening slate has 15 games, and we have our clear favorite at 7:30. That is 2 top 3 teams. Oregon hosting Ohio State on NBC. Again, across the country for Ohio State, a loaded team who has not had an opportunity to even play a top 40 team and will now be traveling across the country to do so. Oregon in their own right. Dylan Gabriel seems to be a little problematic recently, but the offensive line's doing a good job. I'm not sure if they have a whole lot of skill guys there. It seems like they don't, which seems so strange when we start to talk about some of these top teams, but how they actually don't have a lot of great skill position players. They have great domination usually by good quarterback play and in the trenches and some real difference makers on defense. And we've had recent conversations, talk about Georgia and Alabama and teams like that having problems with real difference makers on offense, and Oregon seems to be the latest team with that problem. So what's going to happen here? Neutral site, it's Ohio State, right? But is it going to be a matter of where it's played here? Home field advantage and travel for Oregon? This is just a very interesting ball game on NBC. I tend to lean with the much better roster. 3 points on the road is what Ohio State's getting. 54.5 point over-under. But I am setting up to watch this game as my prime time on Saturday. Now, channel flippers, we have several options. Tennessee will be looking to bounce back against Florida at 7 o'clock on ESPN. And they should, in theory, if they are a quality team, and it seems like they are on both sides of the football, but kind of freshman QB kind of bounce back there. 15-point favorites at home. Florida is sort of making a climb back here. They're 3-2 now. Wins over Mississippi State and a nice win over Central Florida last week. But just, can they survive and kind of keep some hope alive for Billy Napier? Do they even want to? DJ Langley's completing almost 70% of his passes now. We'll see what happens in this ball game if there's an upset in Vols country. Fresno State will be hosting Washington State at 7 o'clock as well. That'll be an interesting game, as of course Washington State and Oregon State, teams without a country per se this season, playing a lot of Mountain West squads. So I'm still interested in that one. That's on FS1. Washington State still sitting with a 4-1 record. Fresno got bullied last week by UNLV. They really weren't that bad at all against Michigan, and then haven't played anybody. Sacramento State, New Mexico State, and New Mexico in between there, and smacked around those teams. It's possible Fresno isn't really that good of a football team, but they'll get a better barometer in hosting Washington State. And that line's only 3. And I think Washington State's pretty all right. So we'll see in that one. Next up, I have Ole Miss, of course, heading on the road to LSU. Now, this is billed as a big-time game. ABC 7:30, of course it is. But these teams might possibly be playing for fourth or later in the SEC. Neither one might be in the playoffs. That's fine. These are still two very entertaining teams to watch. Right? LSU's back in the fold here. Took some time off, took a week off. Back spraying the ball over the football field, right? Still defensive problems for LSU, who also lost its best defensive player, but might be better without him for this season. And then Ole Miss, of course. What do we got with Ole Miss? First game against quality competition. They get absolutely whacked. So what's going to happen here when they play a squad that is more of their talent level, per se? They're 5-1, 1-1 in conference play. LSU's 4-1, 1-0 in SEC conference play. Of course, it was 2 weeks ago, that Kentucky humbled Ole Miss 20-17. They bounced back against South Carolina. The defense really led the way. 27-3 was the final. This game, the over-under here is currently sitting at 61.5. Seems kind of low to me. Ole Miss favored on the road by 3.5. But again, this is Death Valley at night. 4 straight wins for the Tigers after that 27-20 loss to USC. They could just as well be undefeated. Nicholas State, they beat South Carolina on the road. 36-33 wins over UCLA and South Alabama as well. Tigers are not a team to take lightly, especially at home with Nussberger being able to throw for 400 yards a game. In a game, completing almost 70% of his passes, by the way. 15-4 touchdown interception ratio, almost 1,500 yards. I have a future out on him for Heisman. He's not in the talk at all right now, but hey, LSU could still get there. I tend to believe in them, even though they're not as well-rounded a football team, a little bit more than Ole Miss, particularly at home. 15 sacks in only 5 games on the season as well. Of course, quality competition tends to favor into those types of the statistics as well. But I kind of like the Tigers a little bit. This will still be an awesome game in the evening slate. And then I do have at 8 o'clock, Iowa State heading on the road. They're currently ranked 11th and undefeated, of course. I have them in my 10th spot. Heading to West Virginia, who ran for over 300 yards in a big win for the Mountaineers last week to stay above 500. They're also undefeated in Big 12 play. They were able to beat Oklahoma State 38-14 on the road last week. And they survived Kansas 2 weeks ago, 32-28. So again, a team that's very middle class could lose, certainly, and get crushed by Iowa State, which is making its bones by being more of a steady offensive presence and stifling on the defensive end of things. Favored by a field goal here in a 53.5-point over-under. So this is actually a game that could determine one of the top teams, top spots in the Big 12 right now. So this is actually a game with some higher stakes there. Some of my notable games then: Louisiana Monroe hosting Southern Miss at 5 o'clock on ESPNU. Again, records say Louisiana Monroe 4-1, 2-0 in conference play. Southern Mississippi, measly 1-4, 0-1 in the Sun Belt. And Monroe is only 7-point favorite at home. So perhaps these teams aren't really that far off. 7 o'clock, we have Texas State hosting Arkansas on ESPN+. Again, Arkansas State, former Power 4 quarterback in there, and a team that's able to put up some points. They're only favored by 14 points here. I apologize. I think I said Arkansas. I meant Arkansas State, but an interesting Sun Belt battle there with about a 65.5-point over-under. We should see some points. Also at 7, ESPN2 is going to have Florida Atlantic hosting North Texas, a team known for their ripe offense, currently sitting at 4-1. Oregon State's going to play at Nevada on CBS Sports Network at 7:30. Nothing of actual real particular significance, I don't think, or note, but Oregon State's been an all-right football team at 4-1. They're only favored by a field goal on the road in this game. Louisiana's hosting Appalachian State at 7:30 on ESPN+. Louisiana is 4-1, Look like an all right Sun Belt team so far. That feisty Kentucky team and interesting Vanderbilt team are playing each other on the SEC network at 7:45. And at 8 o'clock, Syracuse still rolling on. They're playing NC State on the ACC network in the evening game. Again, NC State's looked gross. They're now 3-3, 0-2 in conference play. Syracuse 4-1, 1-1 the ACC. 3-point favorites on the road ever since Cal McCord's rolled over there. They're looking like a little bit more productive, hopeful squad there are the Orangemen. Our evening slate's pretty nice and easy. 9 o'clock, UCLA will be hosting Minnesota on the Big Ten Network. We'll say 11 o'clock's Hawaii hosting Boise State, ranked 15th on CBS Sports Network. So you can say Gente, hopefully he probably won't go for a full game, right? Boise State's going to get up early in this one. It was too bad he's pulled a half last week against Utah State. Let's give him a few carries. Let's have him put up those Heisman numbers. And nestled in between there at 10:15 on ESPN, of course, we're going to get Colorado coming off a bye, hosting number 18 Kansas State. 3.5-point favorites are the Kansas State Wildcats there. 55.5-point over/under. Heisman candidate here in Travis Hunter, who's still playing a ton of snaps, most snaps in the game, coming off a rested period. Shedeur Sanders is still putting up crazy numbers, considering he's getting sacked more than all but a handful of quarterbacks in the country, under pressure more than almost any quarterback in the country. They can't run the ball at all. They have 400 team yards rushing in the season. That's just outrageous. They're so bad on offense outside of him and the receivers, and he's completing 70% of his passes for 1,600 yards, 14 touchdowns, 3 picks, and he's still able to move out of the pocket a little bit. Although, boy, is that a struggle, and pocket is used loosely. The defense still isn't very good. I mean, it's still a two-man show with Travis Hunter and Shedeur Sanders. Now, they can throw the ball, and they give up a lot. They don't have a good run defense, and then Kansas State cannot throw the ball and can run the ball and cannot stop the pass. So it's going to be Kansas State doing a whole lot of running, and Colorado struggling with that, and Colorado doing a whole lot of passing, and Kansas State struggling to stop that. Very interesting ball game to me. I'm going to be excited to watch this on the late night slate. I wouldn't hurt my feelings, even though I don't like all the flashiness. Regardless of that, if the on-field play is good, that's all I want to see. Let's see what Colorado can do with a couple weeks prep and 2 really good, phenomenal players if they can pull an upset here at home. I'm excited for this ball game. Now, your categories, your top watch. Ohio State at Oregon obviously takes the cake. Your audible. In that noon slate, there's a lot of options. So flipping to, this makes me sick, but Washington at Iowa. And flipping off of Wisconsin Rutgers is an option, but really that's kind of a wild card altogether. If Clemson's close with Wake Forest, South Carolina, Alabama, but really we could have a few interesting games or no interesting games in that noon slot as we tend to get on with the day. Underrated, I have Vanderbilt at Kentucky. That 7:45 SEC network game. Either one of those teams could move on to do more damage in the SEC. Not that either one's going to win it or make the playoffs, but kind of an underrated game there. And Hail Mary, upset game. West Virginia over Iowa State's a possibility. I tend to think Colorado over Kansas State is the best chance for a true upset. Small screen starlet, Toledo at Buffalo. Although, again, with all the conference realignment, it's tough for kind of an under-radar game. I also really like Memphis at South Florida in that afternoon. That may actually be the best one on the slate now that I think about it. And late night snack, obviously, is Kansas State at Colorado. So thank you very much for a little bit quicker, slightly quicker college football preview. I got some other stuff going on, hoping to diversify some of the podcast episodes. coming up here as I've got different things going on. Obviously, the NBA and basketball starting up here, but thank you very much for keeping tuned for these episodes, at least week to week. I appreciate it, and we'll chat with you later. Bye.
Don't forget the money, man.
All my blessings, 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 all my blessings.
I need my blessings every penny. Daily counting every single one, I'm seeing plenty. Level up and watch that beat turn into a